Welcome back. This is your man, Ethan the Truth. I am going to hot drop you part two of Three Worlds. Part one was about middle class. Part two will be about the poor, growing up poor. I'm going to give it to you from my own personal perspective because I grew up poor. Keep in mind, these were my viewpoints, my thoughts, the way that I felt growing up poor. I cannot speak for every person or every individual who grows up poor in this world because the circumstances are always different and relatable relatively to the individual and how that circumstance was for the different things that they had to deal with in their life and their surroundings. So I can only give you my viewpoint, my thoughts as a young man growing up poor on the south side of Chicago in a housing project. So on episode one, when I talked about middle class, I shared some information about some things that happened, if you didn't catch it, about my mom getting her purse snatched on the bus, some shootings, killings, things like that I had seen and been around and witnessed as a young man growing up. So one of the things that I want to talk about right away is when you grow up poor, you are exposed to a lot of circumstances that the middle class and the rich people or wealthy people will not be exposed to on a day-to-day basis. And that's usually your surroundings as far as the conditions of the neighborhood, the individuals in the neighborhood that you live around, and different things that take place on a daily basis in your neighborhood and surrounding neighborhoods where you live, whether that be violence, selling of illegal things, theft, prostitution, drug dealing, gang violence. Just all sorts of different things where, don't get me wrong, those things still exist in other neighborhoods, but in the poorer areas, when you're growing up, they're amplified. They're on steroids if you have it, because the conditions surrounding permit this type of behavior to take place more loosely. If you take a person that owns a home, 9 times out of 10, that person takes pride in it. But when you don't own anything but the shirt on your back, people tend not to take a lot of pride in all of their surroundings. I'm not saying that that's right. I'm just telling you from my viewpoint, the way that I saw things. If you want to take, for instance, even something as simple as graffiti on the wall, that's to me, in my opinion, sometimes when people graffiti, even in a form of art, it's a self-expression and a cry out for wanting to have ownership on something. They're tagging something. They're putting their name on it to want to have ownership, to want to belong for something that's not theirs. And unfortunately, no matter how talented you are, you could be the best carpenter in the world, but if you don't have the tools to build a house, it's not going to make a difference. The reason I'm using that situation as an illustration is because a lot of times in a poor community, you have very talented people, but they don't have the tools to express and use their talents in a way to get them out of the circumstance in which they are living. That's the reason that I use that illustration. You see people who, if they're gifted in sports, they may get noticed and they're able to get out of that situation. But a lot of times in poor communities, if it's not something that's going to be relevant to some type of entertainment, where it's sports or the music industry or dancing, some type of form of entertainment, it's hard to express whatever talent you may have in another craft if you don't have the tools, and the tools are not using your body. The reason I say that is because if it's sports, you're using your body. If it's dancing, you're using your body. If you're singing or rapping, doing music, you're using your body. But if it's any other kind of talent that you may be gifted in that field, if you don't have the necessary tools to do it, you could be a computer genius, but if you don't have the means to purchase the electronic gadgets you would need to show that you could build this massive supercomputer, it may take you years, if you're ever able, to save up the money to get your hands on the tools that you need to do that. Now, again, this is just my perception from the things that I saw growing up poor, and these are just my views. Another thing, and I'm going to talk about the way that I felt, because like I said, I can't talk about how other people feel. I can't read people's feelings. I can't read people's hearts. I can't read people's minds. But I will tell you, I remember even as a young child, because I was poor, when we would go to certain stores and my mom would be looking around, I remember security guards following us around looking. And I remember my mom just kind of making it like it wasn't a big deal because she didn't want to have the conversation. But even as a young child, I understood probably around 10, 11 years of age that this security guard is watching us because we're poor black people. I'm not crying the race card. I'm giving you the facts of the way that I felt. And I felt in my mind, and some of the security guards were black too. I'm not saying all the security guards were white. Some of the security guards were black. But I felt like they were watching us because we were poor black folks. We came in on the bus, or maybe we came in, in a beat up car. There was a point in time where my mom had a car that ran well, but it had a hole in the floorboard where when we would be going down the street, you had to keep your foot over to one side in the back of the car because it was rusted out down there in the bottom. That's a true story. I'm not making that up. I could see the ground through the bottom of my mom's car, but what could she do? There was nothing she could do. And I remember her way of fixing that after a while was to take some old license plates and put it over the hole down there and then put a rug over that. To me, that was normal and it was fixing it, and those are the type of things that as I got older, I realized that I was poor. When you're a child, you really don't know how poor you actually are. You don't know how close you are to possible homelessness if one small thing doesn't work out. But as an adult, I realized, or even before, I realize it more now as an adult, but even as a young man, I was able to see right away, like, oh man, like, we're really poor. Like, my mom was really one step away from us not having much of anything. So that played a lot on me mentally, because I remember even as I started to get older, when I was about 14 or 15, I hardly ever wanted to go in a store unless I knew exactly what I was going to buy in that store, because I felt like by me being a black young man from the projects, if I didn't buy anything when I came out of the store, they were going to think that I was in there stealing. Now, I can't say that's how everybody feels. I'm telling you how I felt as a young black man. And some of these stores had black cashiers, black security guards, black managers walking around, but that's still the way that I felt, because that's just how I felt. I felt like if I didn't buy something out of that store, there were times where I wouldn't find something in a store and I would look for whatever the cheapest thing was in the store just to buy it when I checked out, because I didn't want to feel like they thought I walked in there and was stealing. Now, I remember when I was young and realizing how poor I was and living in a housing project. I don't remember how old I was, maybe, if I had to guess, maybe 13. And when I started thinking about how black people were called minorities, it made me feel small on the inside, like second class, just because of that word minority. I'm not saying it was supposed to. I'm simply telling you how I felt as a young black man. I felt like minority made me second class, small. And not only was I a minority, I was poor. So I felt that made me feel even smaller on the inside. That had nothing to do with my mom. She instilled me to have good values. She instilled me to have self-confidence. And so did my grandfather. he instilled me with good values and instilled me to, stand up straight, stick up for yourself, have your chest out. My grandfather was a strong man, strong black man from Arkansas, retired from the steel mill. He was a substitute teacher, put himself through college, one of the strongest black men and great role models I could have possibly had. But my own perception of realizing how poor I was, that I was a minority, not by choice, but just by selection, because we don't get to choose. You don't get to choose whether you're born poor, born rich, or born middle class. You're just born. You're just born to the parents that have you. You don't get to choose. But, when I realized what my life was at that young age, probably 12 or 13, I was like, man, I'm a minority and I'm poor. And I felt like that made me a second class individual where I didn't really fit into the upper part. And when I say upper, I don't mean wealthy, but I just mean like the regular part of society where I was just a regular American citizen. Instead, I was a minority, poor American citizen in my eyes. Those are just my own personal thoughts of realizing what my life was like and what my surroundings were like being poor. It took me probably until I was about 17 to realize that I was whoever I wanted to be on the inside. So probably for, 3-4 years, then it finally dawned on me, well, yeah, I might be a minority, I might be poor, but, I can still be a great individual. I can still, be somebody. That doesn't mean anything. And I definitely don't have to be a victim of my circumstances. I can find a way to dig myself up out of the hole. Same way my mom, did for us. And so obviously that instilled more self-confidence into me as I began to, come of age and turn into a man, in a few years after that. But I can definitely tell you that when you realize that you're poor, it does do something to you psychologically. I can tell you that from as young as I would have been able to wear shoes until I was 15 or 16, all of my tennis shoes were either hand-me-downs or if they were brand new, they were from Payless. That was the best my mom could do at that time. I grew up watching the Chicago Bulls win, and I had to buy my own first pair of Jordans, as a teenager when I started working. My mom couldn't afford it. It just wasn't something that she could pull money towards doing. Now, my mom was great. My mom watched every Chicago Bulls game with me and all 6 championship games with me. That's the best she could do. She couldn't afford to take me to a Chicago Bulls game at the United Center. The funds wouldn't allow it. She couldn't afford to get me a Jordan jersey or a pair of Jordan tennis shoes. The funds didn't allow it. When I say I grew up poor, my mom made some of my clothes. My mom sewed me a suit that I took school pictures in first grade. I'm just going to pause on that. I want you to think about that. I want you to think about how poor you have to be for your mom to sew you a suit for picture day at school. Full pants, full jacket. All she bought for me was a clip-on tie and a shirt. And those came from back in the day in Chicago. They had a thrift store called Unique's Thrift Store. And that's where that shirt and tie came from. And my dress shoes came from Payless. And I couldn't tell you about the socks. I don't remember. But the reason I'm telling you that is I still had a great life. It was still great. But as I started to really realize things, I realized just how poor I was. And it started to play on me psychologically as an individual as far as what my self-worth was. Because when you're living in a place where your rent is only $25 to $150 a month, you best believe the circumstances are going to fit it and are going to match. And even though everyone else around you is living the same way, you still, as you become of age, you still learn that life isn't supposed to be that way. that life is supposed to be better, not easier. I didn't use the word easier. Life is supposed to be better. There's a difference. And I realized that right away. And it really played on me psychologically. Like I said, I mean, I felt like if I didn't buy at least a pack of gum going out of a store, they were going to think that I stole something because I was a poor minority young black man. Not playing a race card. I'm telling you how I felt as a poor minority young black man. I'm not telling you white people made me feel that way. I'm not telling you anyone made me feel that way. That's how I felt about myself from looking at the rest of the world and then looking at who I was and what my surroundings were at that time. So I can tell you that it's hard to see hope when you're at the bottom of the well and you don't see a ladder or rope or anyone else hears you calling out. And that's what it feels like when you're poor. It feels like you're down at the bottom of a well. No one knows you're down there. No one cares you're missing. And you got to try to find a way out. And all the water that's around you is sewer water. That's what it feels like when you're poor. If I had to give an analogy, it would be that. You're at the bottom of a well, no stairs to climb out, no one throwing you a rope to help pull you out, no one looking down the well for you to see if you fell down there. Maybe that's why you're missing. You're just there. And the water to survive on is sewer water. That's how I would have to describe how it felt when I realized the situation of what my living circumstances were. Not the way that my mother raised me, not the values she instilled, not the wonderful home she provided for the inside of where we were at. Just the simple fact that I was poor and I felt like my self-worth in this world wasn't something that would be recognizable on a platform of where human life should be recognized and valued. I remember also when I was young, there were certain areas my mom just told me not to go in. There was an area called Bridgeport in Chicago where my mom told me not to go over. Don't go over there in Bridgeport. And, I'll just be blunt. That just wasn't an area where black people were supposed to be. And, as I got older, 15, 16 years of age, I realized that that's not fair. I mean, anybody should be able to go anywhere. And I'm not talking about to do anything you want to do, but if you want to go over there and get something to eat, or if you want to go on a walk somewhere, you should be able to do that. The reason I say that is having a middle class living now, my children have all sorts of friends. They have some friends that don't have as much as them. They have some friends that have 10 times as much as them. And, they welcome my children into their home. These people are nice to my children. They're kind. My children have friends of different races, different cultures, and they get along just fine. And, I can definitely tell you that their middle class lifestyle has been a lot better. My children are regularly provided with plenty of amenities. I wouldn't call it spoiling them, but my children are definitely provided with plenty of amenities to help them have a comfortable lifestyle so that they can feel good about themselves and, be able to sleep comfortably at night and know that they have some value to their life. And I also feel that when you know that you live a certain way that is below a lot of the other people around you, you want to live better. It's just that sometimes you can't figure out where to start and how to get there, especially if you're not an adult. If you're a teenager, you're a young person, you're a child, you start to learn, you start to notice. But unfortunately, you're looking to your parents to help you elevate and level up, if you'll have it, from that situation, as my man Devontae would say, level up from there. But as an adult, yes, you can, say, let me get out a pen and paper and find a plan to level up. But as a child, you're waiting for your parents to do that for you. You're waiting for them to find a way to elevate you out of that situation. And unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. A lot of times in poor communities, you see generations of poor communities where it just kind of goes on and on and on from one generation to the next. And I think that's where you have to look at breaking those generational circumstances. I don't like to use the word curse, but generational disadvantages. You have to want to break that cycle. You have to find a plan and a way to want to break that cycle so that life is better. Now, I will tell you that there are some beneficial things to growing up poor. Now, I can have $1,000 in my pocket, and no matter what store I go in, I'm still going to look on the clearance rack. It may be brand new, but that doesn't mean I'm going to pay full retail for it, because I grew up learning that your dollar goes a lot further when you're frugal. Now, there are wealthy people who still do that type of thing. Just because you have the money doesn't mean you should blow the money, you know. So there are some benefits to growing up poor and the things that you learn and what they instill in you as far as values. I still to this day don't like to waste food, because I know what it's like to not necessarily have what you want to eat. You may have something to eat, but it may not be what you want, and you may not have a choice. I know what that's like. So I value food, as well. And that's not a bad thing. I feel like there are some beneficial things to that. But I'll never forget when I was about 27, I was on the phone with my grandfather. And, at this point, I had a great job. I would have considered myself still middle class. And, I was a father. And my grandfather and I were just having a regular conversation. And I'll never forget that he told me, and I actually passed this information on to some of the younger generations in in my personal family. But my grandfather told me to, be mindful and be respectful of the police if I were to get pulled over. He was like, because they're not out here playing with people, and you shouldn't be out here playing with them. He was like, if they want your license and registration, give it to them. If you get a ticket, take your ticket and keep it moving. At least you'll have your life. Because he said, if you come across the right police officer, you're fine. If you come across the wrong police officer, you may have a problem. And I thought that was valuable information that my grandfather gave me. Now, the reason I'm sharing that with you is, to me, it was still valuable information because my grandfather wasn't poor either. But as a poor person, you do one of two things usually with authority. You either defy or you're extremely cautious because you know that you could turn a bad situation worse. It's usually one or two things. But my grandfather, I felt like that wasn't what he was telling me. He was just telling me to simply be respectful. Simply be respectful, obey the law, and just be careful. I mean, that's pretty much what I took from what my grandfather was telling me. And when you grow up poor, and my grandfather grew up poor, and, he went through even harder times because he, grew up during racism times and things like that. And when it was extreme back then in Arkansas. And, your mindset doesn't always change from that. And so even when you grow up poor and you may become middle class or you may become wealthy, your mindset still doesn't change from those circumstances. There's still a mindset where you're cautious. I mean, it took me years to not feel like it mattered if I went into a store and didn't buy anything. And it took me years to not worry about if I was going to get pulled over by a police officer or not, just because I was black. It took me years not to worry about things like that. When I say not worry about it, I don't mean not be cautious, but I mean like just it's no reason to worry. I'm not doing anything. I'm a working, class citizen paying taxes just like everybody else. I've got to be cautious, but doesn't mean you should be worried. But when you grow up poor and you grow up and you don't have a lot of advantages in your favor, it's easy to feel on the inside, in my opinion, second class to a lot of things. When I talk about shopping in a store or walking out because you didn't, purchase something. Now it doesn't matter to me. I'll walk in any store, and if I don't find what I want, I don't find what I want. I don't even think twice about walking out of the door. But being younger, and even as a young adult man, there were some times still where I felt a little uncomfortable, maybe walking out of a store and not buying something. But it took years to get that out of my mind psychologically, just because of the way that I felt, not due to anyone else, just the way that I felt about my own circumstances and the way that my surroundings were at that time. And the same thing. And when I talk about the police officer situation, it's a cultural disadvantage thing, like I talked about in episode 1 when I talked about middle class. Most of the time in poor neighborhoods, your interaction, with the police department may be negative to the aspect of not them doing anything necessarily abusive to you, but you see a lot of, how can I use this word? You see a lot of things being addressed in the neighborhood that are disciplinary, if you have it. And when that happens, you start to look at the aspect of, well, instead of just, hey, how you doing, and shooting a breeze, you maybe have the aspect of, well, I don't want to go to jail, or I don't want them to think I'm the suspect, or I don't want them to think I did anything wrong. That stuff starts playing on your psyche. So then anytime you get pulled over, you're automatically thinking, oh man, I hope they don't think I'm the suspect in this situation, or think that I just did, the robbery that was over here. Those things play into your mind when you grow up a certain way. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure other races feel that way too. I'm simply speaking from my perspective as a young black man growing up on the south side of Chicago and growing up poor in a housing project. Those are just things that, I can remember riding around with some of my friends, sometimes just riding up and down Lakeshore Drive, and, a cop might get behind us. And a lot of times we didn't even get pulled over. But when we did, we'd just be nervous for no reason. Nobody had anything. Nobody was doing anything. But all of a sudden you lock up and you're checking the, make sure your seatbelt's in good, and you're doing the exact speed limit, and you're just nervous, more nervous than you should be, because you automatically feel like a victim sometimes because of the circumstance in which you are living, if that makes sense. I'm not saying that the police did anything to make me feel that way, but my interactions from the way that I grew up and feeling that I was a poor minority, which I felt were strikes against who I was as an individual before I was able to realize that I was whoever I wanted to be as an individual. Those were the way some of my feelings were. So being poor does play on your mind psychologically. It does, in my opinion, make a person feel hopeless at times and not necessarily see where the lifeline is, and that there is light on the other end of the tunnel. It makes a person sometimes feel they're at the bottom of a well and no one cares that they're missing, and they're just down there and there's no way out. And so those can definitely play into how a person decides to live life. It's easy to live in the moment. I don't have anything, so as soon as I get $1 in my hand, I'm going to get whatever I can possibly get with it, whether it's something that's beneficial or not, whether it's a necessity or an accessory. I'm going to get it, because I don't know where my next dollar is going to come from, or if I'm ever going to get another dollar. So I'm just going to spend, and tomorrow looks hopeless. So I'm not going to worry about tomorrow. I'm not going to worry about saving. I'm not going to worry about retirement, 401k, investing. I'm just going to spend, because tomorrow won't be any better anyway, and it doesn't matter. Screw it. It's easy to have that mentality when you're poor. Now, the flip side to that is when you are able to realize that there is always a way out. It just may be extremely hard to get there, or at least I'll say 9 times out of 10. I won't say always because everybody's situation is different, but at least for me, I was able to see, yes, I can make life better for myself. My mom made life better for herself. I can make life better for myself and my children as well. And still take the things that I learned growing up the way that I did to use them in a positive manner, to be frugal, to spend better, to exercise some self-discipline in certain aspects of life. And it took years to try to do that. It wasn't like I just learned the lessons right away and was able to do it. Some of that stuff I'm still working on to this point. But if I had to summarize it, I would say that growing up poor definitely can play on your psychological self-worth as an individual and seeing that there is better ahead for you. It just may be harder for you to get to, but you could do it. I would say that would be hard, but I would also say that you can learn some valuable lessons that can take you far in life and stick with your life, middle class or wealthy, if you make it there, and become beneficial parts of life for you. So if I had to summarize that, that's how I would summarize the life of growing up and being poor in my personal opinion. As always, you can reach me on my Instagram at Ethan the Truth. I'm going to load this on YouTube, and that my YouTube's under Ethan the Truth. My Twitter's Ethan the Truth. And if you have any thoughts on the subject, make sure you hit me up. Let me know. I would love to hear feedback. I'm always down for that. And I will bring you part 3 soon, and it will be on the rich and the wealthy. And as always, I would challenge you to ask yourself, look yourself in the mirror, eye to eye, face to face, you and you, am I being great?